Tatiana Kukhareva. She's a senior Russian journalist, very closely tracking not just the war at the front lines, but also events or action at the Kremlin. Tatiana, may I begin by asking you, Ukraine says Russian missiles have hit civilian targets, killing close to 60 civilians in Ukraine. Russia is being accused of specifically targeting hospitals, not just when Prime Minister Narendra Modi was in Russia, but even now, ma'am.
Hi, Gaurav. So, Ukraine has been accusing Russia of targeting civilians from the get-go. But the point being that, you can hardly call a military institute that is being used to prepare people for war, you can hardly count that as a civilian target. And when we look at the strike on Poltava, in which exactly that, a military institute was hit, it's a huge stretch to call that a civilian target. Whether we see, hits from the Ukrainian side on the central cities of, central Belgrade, where there's nothing to even come close to a military side target within, a couple of kilometers. It's a very big difference. But I can't quite fathom as to how the Ukrainian side is spinning out of this one, because calling a military institute that we've heard has been used to prepare fighters, including NATO instructors being on site, how you can possibly spin this as a hit on civilian targets is beyond my imagination, really.
Okay, but has Ukraine's counteroffensive in Kursk, one, taken Russia by surprise? Two, the reason for this current round of what Ukraine describes is major escalation?
Well, look, I wouldn't call it an escalation. The Russian side, Moscow, has been very clear from the very beginning. We're hitting military targets. The centers of preparation of fighters are very clearly military targets. And you see, Volodymyr Zelensky asking on daily basis for longer range missiles on every single platform available to him. So I wouldn't necessarily call this an escalation.
Okay.
We're just continuing with the same strategy, I would say. Destroying military targets and any possibility, especially with Ukraine being very, very clear that they want to hit targets deep inside Russia. And they haven't been shy on those, ambitions either for months now.
But what's the end game now? How do you appreciate what the end game could well be? Does Russia have a roadmap for peace and perhaps a ceasefire? What's the thinking in Kremlin?
Well, in my personal opinion, as a person, generally speaking, it's one thing to get a fighter jet, is another thing to be able to use it properly. So getting advanced equipment is very different from being able to efficiently use it. And I'd say the Russian military forces have been very, very successful at hitting those Western supplied advanced machinery. We get these reports on a daily basis. We see those pictures of tanks, very advanced rocket launchers being destroyed. So I'd say this has been consistently successul on from our point of view.
Okay.
In the meantime, basically the President Putin has been very clear, again from the very beginning of this conflict, is that we are ready to come to a negotiations table, but it needs to be a negotiation. It can't be just Ukraine backed by its Western sponsors saying, look, this is what we want, and there's a peace process, any negotiation has to A, include Russia, and B, it has to happen on the exact terms that the president has laid out months ago.
So is there any middle ground? Because Russia too is reported to have deployed longer range weapons and missiles. Is there a message here, not just for Ukraine, but for NATO allies and the United States on weapons supply to Ukraine?
Well, look, I think the president has been very clear on those red lines, but so far, I think that the most dangerous thing that we can do is, kind of spin this a little bit out of proportion. So far, yes, the NATO countries are supplying Ukraine, and we've said it repeatedly, that the main thing for us and for any person with a normal perspective, is that you can't have anything resembling anything moving towards a peaceful solution or a resolution of this conflict when you're kind of supplying weaponry and pulling fuel to the fire with one hand, and with the other hand you're saying, oh, we want a peaceful resolution for Ukraine. So if anything, the biggest message here is that they should stop the hypocrisy. You can't put in more weaponry and then talk about any type of resolution to the conflict. Just like prior to the beginning of this conflict, they were pouring in millions in lethal aid into Ukraine and saying, look, we are not doing anything, we're just preparing for Russian aggression, and then we're just, this is just aid. It's the same thing. You can't kind of fuel this conflict and say, oh, well, we're for peace here.